Hey, welcome, brother. My name is Sven Masterson. I'm a men's coach and mentor. And today I want to talk to you about the subject of emotional and physical affairs. A few weeks ago, I wrote a blog post titled The 10 Characteristics That I Have Found Men Have Who Have Survived and Thrived in Emotional and Physical Affairs. And today I have invited Garrett Prettyman of Garrett Prettyman Coaching to join me. Garrett and I have been friends for, I think, Garrett, maybe 3 years now, maybe more than that. Garrett is also a coach of and mentor of men, and I invited him here today to talk with me about this article and his specific and unique perspectives as both a coach of men as well through some of the same territory, but also because Garrett has some firsthand experience with this. So today we're going to talk about these 10 characteristics one at a time. Garrett is going to have the opportunity to kind of add his yeah buts or yes ands, his unique perspective on those. And then Garrett, I'm going to invite at the end to share with us anything he would uniquely add to characteristics he has seen in men that get through these physical and emotional affairs with as much grace and poise as possible. And then I'll tell you how you can contact either Garrett or myself further if you want to talk about your emotional or physical affair. And then we'll be done. So hang with us and hang in for the ride. It's going to be authentic and I think pretty deep. Garrett is a very deep man. And with that, I'll introduce Garrett. Why don't you tell us who you are, where you are, and 60 seconds of how you came to be sitting in this chair in front of me, and then we'll jump into the first characteristic.
All right, Sven. So yes, my name is Garrett Prettyman. I'm a mountain man at heart. You see me sitting here right now in my 1978 Timberline camper. I have multiple homes in different states, but I choose the simple life. I'm a hardworking man. I've always been a good provider, and I thought I knew how to be a good husband. I thought I knew what a wife needed. I was a man that was suddenly blindsided by an emotional affair. My marriage, I banged my head on the wall for years, trying to figure out so many frustrating aspects of how to have a relationship with a woman, because the complaints I was getting from her, I thought I knew how to fix it. I thought I knew what the problem was. But what really blindsided me was when my wife had an affair. It started emotionally. And the unique thing about my situation is, although she had started to have some emotional affairs with guys over the years, it ended up being with a woman. And that was a real 2x4 of clarity that hit my face when I suddenly realized I cannot control another person to be a certain way so that I can be happy. I need to be able to create my own happiness and have my own standards I live by.
Right, Garrett, I'm glad you brought this up because, we talked about this before. A lot of men in the world, their solution, their kind of immediate go-to when they find out a woman might be doing some things that feel inappropriate is they try to control their wives' access to men, right? And so unpack that a little bit for us. What's wrong with that, or what's ineffective, I should say, about that particular approach to trying to prevent infidelity? I mean, I hope it's obvious, but maybe if you could tell us about your journey through that a little bit, that would be handy.
That really comes down to, like you mentioned in your post, about the locus of control. I didn't realize that I can always control my reactions. I can always control how I want to behave, and I can control what I'm going to give energy to and what I'm going to connect with and who's invited along on my journey. I used to think that if you got in a canoe and found a pretty girl and got a good job and started paddling across the lake, you would end up at happily ever after. What I discovered is, until you know where you're going, you can't invite the pretty girl or invite the job that supports that journey. So once I developed that internal locus of control, that's when I was able to realize that all she was doing was revealing my insecurities when she would be with another guy at work, or maybe she was at a movie with friends and they were mostly guys and I was feeling jealous. These are feelings that she's not putting in me. I realize these are feelings I already have, and she's just showing me that I have them. That's when I realized the work is not about make her stop doing these things that make me feel pain, but what's my internal thing that I have control of, and what do I really want to create for myself that I would rather experience? I need to take the control back on what my day looks like and where I'm going apart from her.
Yeah, that's good. That was a whole article right there in itself. Um, Yeah, great words. I think you're going to be touching a lot of hearts here and our viewers, and probably angering a few too. So, as I mentioned, I wrote this article about 10 characteristics of men who get through affairs. I'm going to put the link to the article in the description for anybody watching who hasn't read it or you just want to watch it. But this first one, and just to be clear, because I didn't say this in the article, Garrett, is that I try to put these in kind of the order in which they appear for a lot of men, or the order in which these characteristics, if they show up, will kind of naturally lead themselves to the next one, right? So the very first one I added is each man made a conscious choice to pursue restoration. And the reason I talk about them in this tense, again, these are characteristics I've seen in the hundreds of men I've talked to about this subject, and I know you've done likewise. The first one was that they were men that decided to do it. They decided they wanted to not just end the relationship, right? And I don't have a particular belief that that is superior to one way or the other, right? But just my perspective, and I know you have kind of a unique journey here, so I'm curious how that particular, characteristics of decision to stay in the relationship or not happened in your life.
I definitely have personal experience in this because prior to the affair, I would have gladly wrote a check for $1 million and handed it to somebody and said, I guarantee my wife would never cheat or leave me. It wasn't even a remote thought in my mind. Yeah, there was times I was jealous and insecure, especially early in the relationship when we were in the dating stage. But it never was a crossing thought in my mind when I got out of bed every day that I might have a wife that would have an affair. So when it happened, it was completely like I did not see this coming at all. And so to go back to your point about like a man he needs to choose restoration if he's going to stay with it. A deciding factor for me that I didn't see coming until I started doing more personal development was at first I thought I need to fix this, I need to reattract her, I need to save the marriage, I don't want to lose my wife. But once I started getting crystal clear about what my operating principles are, what my values are, what my boundaries are, later on I ended up taking restoration off the table myself, even though originally it was my primary motivator, because I realized that where my canoe was going across this lake, she cannot support my standards that I have on that ship.
Right, right. That's a great point. All right, let's move on. That's a simple one, I think. Doesn't really need to be, beat up too severely. The second one I put on there, and this is going to be where it starts to poke some eyes, I think, for some men, is that each man refused to see themselves as victims. So I'm curious how that hits you as an affair. Let's just call it affair survivors. There's probably a better term out there, but for our purposes, we'll call you an affair survivor. But also as a coach, how did that characteristic land with you?
So I'm well acquainted with the pain of feeling like I'm being cheated on, I'm being flushed down the toilet like a used rag, I'm being rejected, like all these things are happening to me, and I know what that feels like. And what really gave me liberty, peace, and the ability to create happiness in spite of that was a shift in my mindset. It was a change in how I perceived what was going on. I had to reckon with the fact that women live life in seasons, and there were seasons she gave me that I can look back on with appreciation. She created situations with me in the course of our marriage that felt amazing, and I felt loving, and I can really be grateful that she gave me those points along our life. But also, it comes down to the fact that she is her own person who makes her own choices, and she's using the brain she has, and based on her own past experiences and her own perceptions, she does think she's making the best choices in the moment that she can. And you really can't expect more than that from anybody, not even yourself. We all can justify what we've done up to this point, but all it takes is one new aspect that we hadn't considered, and then we can completely realize, oh, oops, I shouldn't have done that. So to be able to honor her and say, based on what she thinks, she's doing the best she can. I had to think of it like, imagine your partner, you've suddenly found out she has a brain tumor. It's been pushing on her brain. It's been affecting her ability to think clearly and to make good decisions. And then maybe you realize she's going to die in 48 hours. Her life is almost over. Would that knowledge shift how you feel towards her right now? And all that changed in that moment was how you thought about her. And so I had to see her as this is her own emotional flu. This is her own season of issues she's going through. It has nothing to do with me. It doesn't determine my value, my worthiness. I'm not being rejected. I'm just experiencing what it's like to be around a woman who's having her own experiences.
So it sounds like in order then for you to feel non-victimized, you, if I, and I'm just kind of recapitulating what you said, how I heard it, you needed to find a way to understand her actions as one, not being personal, and two, offering her a little bit more benefit of the doubt than just seeing her as like, this demon villain, right? Who is trying to sit there just, twisting your arms and legs and contorting you for, some sort of sick pleasure, right? I love that. I think that's been definitely a big part of the pattern I've seen too, is men that can find a gracious way to view their partner's why, stop being tortured by that why to the degree that it's a better why, right? And a lot of men, and so this is a yeah, but I'm curious how you'd answer. Yeah, but what if it is true, right? What if she is being like that? So how would you answer the guy who is just bent on knowing if it's really true that she was trying to make it personal, right? Then what?
Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of outcomes a man is attached to that can make this miserable for him because he has standards that he's holding her to, and she's not lining up with that standard. And that's really where your pain's coming from. In the moment that you realize that this affair, or even if it's just emotional or physical, is happening, there's a reckoning with the fact that who you thought you married actually doesn't even exist. But what's really a brain jar for us is the person we married has the same face as the woman in the room right now. So it seems like it is the same person, but we have to realize it's not. We are reacting from a version that doesn't even exist. We need to start recognizing who really exists here. And yes, I've laid on the kitchen floor agonizingly in pain, can't breathe, because I'm like, oh my goodness, you're going out with her tonight? And she's like, yeah, and we're going to have sex. And I don't even care. And she just walks out the door. That seemed like a pretty intentional jab, right? Like, wow, what a
Yeah.
cold-hearted woman. But again, you have to realize that for the woman, she has been thinking about what a new relationship would be like with somebody else for quite a few months by the time the relationship gets to this point. It's been so many months, she's already grieved the loss of relationship with you. She's already moved on from the marriage in her head. In her mind, she's no longer actually bound to you. She's off already. There happens to be a paper in the house, so it's our marriage certificate. Us guys think that because that thing's hanging on the wall in the other room, that she's ours. And so again, it comes back to in her perceptions and in her world, she's acting in accordance with what feels right for her. Just as if we were divorced and remarried, we wouldn't feel like we're cheating on our ex-wife by having sex with our new wife. And so again, it comes back to that shift in perspective. We're at two completely different places looking at what's happening, and we're both judging it from a completely different point.
Yeah, very good. I'm curious. I know a lot of people at this point are thinking, doesn't this guy have any standards, man? Why is he at home on the kitchen floor? So I just encourage, if you're listening at this point, keep listening, because the story didn't end there on the kitchen floor. You're still not, you're not, this is not a behavior you're living with today. And I hope men come to see just kind of the evolution of the story that is pretty common in lots of men, but you too, and how they kind of got from that writhing in pain on the kitchen floor to sitting in a camper and traveling the world across your multiple homes. So all right, so the next attribute I saw, characteristic, and the third one I mentioned, is that each man found a willingness to address his own shame, fear, anxiety, and insecurity. And here too, a lot of men are surprised, like, what? She's the cheater. Why are we talking about my shame, fear, anxiety, and insecurity? So I want to hear if this was something that you encountered for yourself, and if so, why, and what that experience was like, and just anything else you would add to that as a fair survivor and coach.
Hmm. Oh, so I'm not gonna lie, Savan. I lost my train of thought right now.
Okay, that's all right. That's no
Let's
problem.
just repeat the question one more time.
Sure. So the third point was that each man found a way to address their own shame, fear, anxiety, and insecurity. And that's something men, when I speak with them at first, and we don't talk about this right away because they're just, when you're in pain, you're not thinking about that you have an issue with shame, fear, anxiety, and insecurity. You're thinking that my wife cheated on me, she's the devil, and I've got to figure out how to make it stop. And so people are often surprised to find a guy like me or a guy like you talking about our own shame, fear, anxiety, and insecurity when this happens. So I'm curious how that point hits you as both a coach and an affair survivor.
Yes. So I didn't realize that there was issues of shame, fear inside me as
Yeah.
I was going through this. I just was freaking out because I was trying to control my wife, trying to save the marriage, trying to get her to stop doing all these things that were driving me crazy. I was trying to calm my own panic by reaching out to her constantly and being like, well, are we okay? Are you going to leave me? I want to trust you. So it wasn't until I started doing personal development work by getting a coach who worked by my side to help me open up my emotional layers to realize that all of my emotions, a lot of them had formulated from experiences earlier on in life, right? We touch a stove and we realize, ouch, that's hot. And then we have a
Mhm.
reaction to stoves for the rest of our life. The problem is, as we go through life, we keep accumulating these reactions. It's almost like they're in a bucket, and the bucket's getting heavier and heavier until finally it gets to the point where almost anybody can do something that triggers something from that bucket. So it's, unless you're just going to be a hermit out in the woods that never sees a human for the rest of your life, you're going to have to eventually face what's in that bucket and realize that some of those reactions are actually disproportional to what's happening. It's actually us reacting right now in in an emotional way to something that bit us a long time ago. And so I started doing shadow work to uncover my emotions, and through meditations I would really sit with those feelings and explore my past memories with them. I'd remember, when is the first time I felt this kind of anxiety or this kind of paranoia or this kind of um, feeling of inadequacy, or like, here I've done all these things, why didn't I get back what I should have for the efforts I did? And I just would revisit those memories, and I would be like, what did I really need at that time and not get? And then I'd bring it to the present. How could I create that right now for myself so I can have it now, since I didn't have it back then?
Yeah, and that's really tied to the beautifully to the victimization point in the prior, right? You said, how can I get that for myself, right? You took ownership of being the person that procured really the medicine for the pain you experienced your whole life. That's beautiful. Tell me a little bit, while we're talking about this topic, what your experience was like with gaslighting. Did you experience any of that? And yeah, just give us the 2 minute version of your gaslighting experience.
I think your insight on the gaslighting is something that's really important that I hadn't even really thought of until you brought it up, but it's so true, especially earlier in the affair, when your gut starts telling you something's wrong, right? The last few months have been, something's a little off. You come in the room and she's on the phone, but then she like hangs up quick, or
Yeah.
she's sitting in the bathroom doing her hair, and then she sees you come in the bedroom, so she closes the door. uh yeah, different things start appearing, like, this is out of the normal, what's she trying to hide? And then at first we're just thinking, well, maybe I'm just being an insecure husband, maybe I'm just, not being a confident man. And she'll start to call on that, because you'll be like, hey, what are you doing in there? And she's like, why do you need to know? And then you're
Yeah.
like, yeah, why do I need to know? So then you kind of feel some shame, like, well, I'm just being over controlling. And she'll say some things that kind of trigger us, like, well, that's what problems with all men are, always trying to control women. Men need to stop doing that. And so it raises up some insecurity and shame in us, like, oh, am I being that guy that's that asshole that women hate? I don't want to be hated. So women definitely will try to get you off their scent by throwing some things up to trigger your shame, and it spins you off reeling. Earlier in the affair is when I experienced that the most. When it finally just all came out in the open and all came flooding out, that that was a whole new level of instinct coming out of me I didn't know I had. I've mentioned to you before, there's like a mate guarding instinct that turns on inside your body where you're like, what? Somebody's going to touch my wife's body, and you're ready just to kill them. And you're like, I don't even know where this drive's coming from. And it really surprised me. I thought I would be upset with my wife, pissed at my wife, um, angry with my wife. All those emotions were mostly feeling like they were towards the other person she was having the affair with. It seems to be something primal in a man's DNA that it doesn't really serve you in the moment to listen to those. For me, I had to like give that part of me a name, realizing it's coming from the lizard part of my brain that's uh, flight, fight, or flee.
Yeah, yeah,
And you just
yeah.
have to tell
Amygdala.
them,
Yeah.
thank you for your advice and your concern, but you can go back in the cave now. We don't need you right now. This isn't survival of the fittest on an abandoned island now, where it's only the strongest can continue to breed.
Yeah, that's good. Well, the next thing I find from men, once they start processing the anxiety, shame, and fear, and anxiety, fear, shame, and insecurity, sorry, is that that's really the moment when they can start to develop what I call an unconditional positive regard for themselves. And that's why that's the fourth characteristic I put in my article, is that men start to get clear of the shame. They start to be able to separate the gaslighting that happened to them and the awful way they felt when someone was rubbing their face in all of their failures. And I mean, some of them stay there, to be honest, and it kind of is a make or break moment for a lot of men. But men that are able to get through that then kind of have gone on to stop focusing on the relationship really at all at that moment. And they have done this kind of side journey into really getting a more secure way to look at their own value and worth and significance. And I have found that to be based on coming to a regard for themselves that is based on something that can't move, right? A lot of these men, when I speak with them, turns out they have a way of reckoning their value as men based on something that is shifty, right? Like the attraction of their wife, for example, something that can go away. And so we, you know very well that we talk about this as death by female, right? They're experiencing death by female. And the reason that death by female is a thing is because life by female is the way of life for a lot of these men. And this is really the stage where they're moving away from life by female and putting in its place something more superior. So talk to us about your journey with that personally, or even how you serve men through the same season. Just anything you want to add to that.
Yes. So you will observe I am a happily divorced man. Okay. I'm living a best version of my life that I've ever have. And I can't even believe it's happening. And a lot of this is because I reckoned with the fact that we're all born naked on this big hunk of dirt, and this dirt owes us nothing. Until we go out and plant something, there's nothing to harvest. We tend to be born, well, yeah, we're all born in families, right? We couldn't feed ourselves. We couldn't take care of ourselves. We couldn't clothe ourselves. Other humans had to provide all these things for us. And it was a great life. We could just get our Tonka truck toy and play in the yard and have a great day and go back in the house where it was warm at night. So we leave that home nest out as we hit puberty and start hitting our teens, and we get a girlfriend, we get married, and we continue that energy of somebody's going to provide these things for me and I can just relax in the rhythm of a daily routine or whatever. That's not the reality. The world doesn't owe you a good job. The world doesn't owe you money. It doesn't owe you love. It owes you nothing. Unless you create it, you don't get to have it. If I just took a man or took myself and dumped myself off on an abandoned island in the middle of nowhere, if I want shelter from the rain, which is a feminine force on this earth, I'd have to build something, right? If I want food, I'm gonna have to go into the feminine ocean of this planet and maybe get fish or something to eat or plant something. The forces of feminine are inescapable. You could remove all women from your life and you're still faced with the feminine change of the planet and nature and the way things work. And so
Mhm.
rather than fight it, you put on your creative hat and you look at what you have, and once you get clear on where your mission is and your purpose as a man, you've created a solid baseline to operate from now that isn't shifting and isn't changing, because that is essential. And that's the biggest thing a man is feeling at this stage, when the affair comes out, is he doesn't know if he's going to be, if she's going to continue to cheat, if he's loved, if he's not, if she's divorcing, if she's going, and all these changes are happening, and all of his dependency on whatever she is doing is just making him feel like his wheels are spinning. So a man needs to bring framework. That's a masculine energy, framework to the feminine. And so a baseline that needs to be established once the affair has been brought to light is, obviously trust is gone. And when trust is gone, you don't have a relationship. It's gone too. So a season of grieving does happen. You do have to go through all 5 stages to really process the loss. Like I said earlier, that version that you thought you married doesn't exist. You need to grieve the loss of that. And now framework happens in time frames too. And so when it comes to establishing that baseline where trust can be recreated with this person, the man needs to say, here's the things I need from you if you would like to earn my trust back. Because you can't just give somebody trust. That's something that they earn from you. And I had a list of things like, for me, will need to have access to your phone for about 3 months. I will need you to no longer work with that coworker at that job anymore. I had some specific things that for a duration of time, I would need to see demonstrated for me to have trust with you again. Now, and I told her, if you don't want my trust, then you don't need to do these things. But here's where I'm going if you don't want my trust. See, I set framework. She then knew the rules. She knew what she could do if she wanted to earn my trust. She knew if she wanted to get back on my boat and go on my amazing journey, what the requirements were, and she had the choice to join or not join. The point was, I was going regardless. But it wasn't just an open-ended, she's just shooting from the hip trying to get her stuff sorted, right? There was a very clear framework of how we're going to go forward from here. That's the masculine energy that needs to come up once the affair kind of blows the
Right.
wheels off.
Yeah, and you had to feel qualified to say all that and do all that. We find, as we talk with men, a lot of them feel really sheepish about saying these kinds of things, doing these kinds of things, right? Like, can I do that? Right? Are we allowed? Right. So talk about a little bit about who you had to understand yourself to be in order to feel okay doing that.
Mm-hmm. I saw a video recently that kind of illustrated a story of this. If we take a $20 bill and crumple it up, it's still worth 20 bucks. You can still go to Walmart and buy food with that. You could even put it on the floor and stomp on it a bunch of times. It's still worth 20 bucks. Okay. So it doesn't matter what kind of shit gets thrown at us as we move through life, affairs, losing your job, health, whatever it is, you're still worth the same. It's just that we may think we're not worth the same.
Right.
So my value was never gone. I tell men it's like this. A lot of men come to me wanting more confidence, more security, less shame. And so they think they need to put a turbocharger on their engine under the hood. But all they need to do is take some rocks out of the bed. The engine's strong enough already. Okay?
Yeah.
The engine's good. There's things that are covering that, they're loading it down, that need to be eliminated.
Yeah, I talk about it sort of like a river, that there's nothing wrong with the riverbanks. We talk about men being a riverbank for the feminine. It's not that you have bad riverbanks, it's that your river is filled with silt and debris, right? So we need to dredge out what's keeping us actually from being well defined and these riverbanks for the feminine. I love that truck analogy. That's great. That fits with my interest more. Okay, so this is where we're going to get in next into the 5th characteristic, where it starts to get controversial for a lot of men, and this is an area where my practice and content, I'm often grotesquely misunderstood, and that's because I say here that each man pursued unconditional positive regard for her, and a lot of men cannot even begin to fathom the idea of developing unconditional positive regard for a woman who's cheating on them. And so I'm not going to recapitulate what I wrote about here in the nuance that explains all that, but I'm wondering how that hit you and what your story is with that, especially as a man who not only saw his wife cheat, but with a woman, right? Like, and I'm saying it that way because that's how a lot of men would experience, not as any judgment on the path your wife took as being more or less severe. But yes, talk to us a little bit about that.
There's some things you kind of try to imagine what it would be like, but you really don't know till you're there. Honestly, if you had came to me previous to the affair and said, yeah, your wife's going to cheat with another woman someday, I'd be like, ooh, that sounds kind of hot. That's what I would have said. Okay. But when you actually get home from work early and you open your bedroom door and there's another gal in your bed, like, I'm telling you what, it's not how you thought it was going to be. You specifically, I'm speaking to the man who's had a woman that had an affair with a woman. You suddenly feel like your gender is being rejected. Okay. Not just I'm no longer like being accepted as her husband, like because I have a penis, I am not desirable now. Like it really cuts at the core of your own identity as a man and what
Right.
you love about being a man. So how to have high regard for women that's doing all these things that are violating your values. I do you hear a very loud motorcycle right now?
I do. It's okay though. Just adds to the masculine effect of this
Right?
whole video. Right?
This is real guys, real dudes talking right
That's
now.
right.
Real
Yeah.
neighbors that
I
drive by and
Where
loud,
I live, it's oftentimes just constant firearms. I like to
right?
tell people when they comment on, hey, that's the sound of liberty here in the mountains where I live. But yeah,
Yeah. Well, it's driving off, so it'll get quieter.
no
Yeah.
problem.
So the high regard. I had to tell myself over and over and over and over, she's doing the best she can. She's doing the best she can. She's doing the best she can. And when I maintained that viewpoint, I could maintain high regard. Because it's when we start imagining if we were in those shoes, how we would feel that we misjudge that she is valuable, even like it comes back to that $20 bill thing, no matter what happens or what she does, just her inherent value as a human being doesn't change.
Right. And that's the thing I have the hardest time helping men understand. And the reason they don't understand it is because they have a system of belief for themselves that reduces their value as men to their achievement and behavior. And the downside of that way of living in the world is you're only valuable then when you're perfect, right? And so if a man sees the world that way, then when he looks at her, she's not being perfect. Her value is now tarnished. That he can't show her, just like he can't show himself, a regard as just for her humanity. And so a lot of men misunderstand when coaches like myself and yourself say this, that we're saying you need to regard her behavior somehow as being acceptable or okay. And I'm very adamant with men, not at all. That you can be very clear that a behavior is not just distasteful, but completely unacceptable to you, and still hold on to that person as a self-sovereign human being has the right to decide how they will live their life, that they still have value and worth as a human, that there's a certain kind of fundamental dignity that we all get because we're that $20 bill or $100 bill or greater, right? And yeah, a lot of guys really, really struggle with this one because that is a hard place to get to if you have this kind of other, what I would call broken belief system. And the other thing, I don't know if I talked about this in the article now, but something I find with a lot of men is they struggle because they're thinking I'm telling them to feel a certain way. And so I like to make it abundantly clear when I talk to men about unconditional positive regard, that is not an emotional response. That is a deliberate act of the will in the man to keep choosing to not follow this victim story of she's a villain, she's awful, she's horrible, she's the million and one derogatory things a man wants to think, but instead remembers this perspective that she's a human being that's probably in a lot of pain and she's acting out of that pain. And to me, that is high regard. It's choosing to live in a story that gives someone the benefit of the doubt for their why. And some people deeply, deeply struggle with this, but it's something I have found so far in the men that have gone on to repair relationships. Not that that's a preferred outcome, but it is an outcome a lot of people want, that none of them have done that without this particular attribute. And related to that, this is kind of flowing into the next characteristic. The sixth characteristic I found among men who survived was that each of them cultivated compassion, understanding, and empathy for her and what led to the affair. And I think you've actually alluded to this a number of times, but curious what else do you have to say about those three things and their role in this journey?
Yes, I do have a few things to share about that. So I already know what the critics are saying by this point. They're like, how could I let myself be a doormat and just let her cheat on me like this? Like, what man would
Yep.
allow that, right? Your high regard is telling me that it's okay that she treats me like this.
Which is
And
false, right? Yeah. Yeah.
so the clarity we're trying to bring is that it's not that you need to start setting boundaries to control her. It's that you need to get clear about what you're going to commit to, what you're going to give energy to, and where and who's invited to at your table as you move forward. But the problem is men are out in the lake again, they're in the canoe, and she's not abiding by the rules. But the problem is he doesn't even know where the canoe's going or what the rules are for the canoe. He just knows that it sucks what she's doing. So he's going around with the paddle trying to swat her every time she does something he doesn't like, but the canoe's just going in circles, right? So we need to get out of that and look forward to what we want to have. So compassion for her. Okay, realize you're 50% of the relationship. Even if you only contributed to her affair by 5%, because maybe whatever that thing is that she's been complaining about for the last decade, we all know that thing or two that she's been bringing up over and over. Maybe that's your 5% that contributed to this. You have to realize, though, that it was her choice. You could have been 95% at fault for the affair. It was her choice. And I found I started becoming more, instead of being like upset or like angry or any of those kinds of emotions toward her, honestly, I just felt sorry that she was at a place where she felt that this was the right course for her. Okay, she again, she's operating on what she thinks is best. But as the man, we have some unique abilities. We're good with data. We're good at looking at the long-term range that something's going. We see trajectory. Okay, we climb up in the crow's nest and we're looking out into the sea, and there's icebergs and there's reefs, and we're trying to navigate all this. She's more just right now. She's sitting on the deck of the boat and the breeze shifts, so she changes what she's doing, oblivious of where the long-term range is. So
Right.
sometimes we can see the woman shooting herself in the foot with something like an affair, or that she's going to run off and live happily ever after with that person. And we're like, no, don't you see how this is going to end terribly? We just have to have compassion with her, thinking of her as if she's 5 years old. She's outside playing in the cold. She's got mud all over her. She's didn't get her nap, and she's running in the house and she's trying to take a cookie out of the cookie jar, and you walked in the kitchen and said, no, you can't have that cookie. I mean, what emotions is going to come out of that 5-year-old at that point?
Right.
Right? Her little girl is very alive in her, and sometimes we have to see that she's just operating from that right now.
I think it's interesting that you talked about the woman sitting on the deck, right? I find one area that helps men with compassion is remembering that even though from the crow's nest we can see way out into the sea, and I might call this the masculine's ability to see the meta, right? Is that women are exceptionally gifted at seeing the present, and we often miss it. A lot of times in my own marriage, for example, my wife spent 20 years telling me about the present and how I was not seeing it as I could be, because I was up in the crow's nest focused only on the horizon. But when you live a life focused on the horizon, you're missing a lot of right nows. And this is where I find a really interesting dance in relationships for all of the missing of the horizon, our female partners are doing. We're missing these moments, right? And when we realize that a lot of the pain and anguish a woman is carrying around in her day-to-day existence, it's because the story that she put on our failure to see that present with them, right? And how much of the pain is just caused by the friction of the difference between, the masculine and feminine, and just our inability to see that nuance and live with it. But I know for myself and men I work with, when men can understand, and here again, that's filling in an interpretation that's more life-giving to both him and to her, they move naturally towards empathy. And it's that compassion and empathy and understanding that starts to create a bridge, right, relationally, that even if he doesn't choose to restore his relationship, still offers him kind of the best path for a future relationship with this woman that's at least amicable, right? But oftentimes leads to just a restoration that's pretty positive. That, in my opinion, leads to the seventh characteristic that I find in men who have gone on to salvage and restore and create something new and better, is that it creates emotional safety. These are men that create emotional safety within themselves and then for her. So I'm curious what you have to say about the topic of emotional safety, not just for a woman, but for yourself.
So there's two directions men tend to go when something like this happens. They turn towards it and they become a better man, or they bury themselves in work or alcohol or porn or whatever, and they just numb through it and they don't really become a better man. And they end up repeating the same dynamics later in life with somebody else, or maybe the same person again. So it's interesting because feminine, she reveals yourself to you.
Yeah.
So a lot of the frustrations you have, it's not so much that she's going out and having a connection. So let's say it's an emotional affair. She's having this emotional, giving her heart basically to another person. It's not that that is what's upsetting you. It's that you know that there's parts of you that you've been holding back for her. And there's parts of your time you've been reserving for her, or the parts of your energy or direction or life focus that you've been creating just for her. And you thought that because you did that, you should have something back. And you're living with that frustration is what you're really living with.
Transactional loving, it sounds like. Yeah. Give and
Yeah.
you get.
Yeah. So the in creating the emotions that you want to have, you have to clearly look at that and be like, okay, here I've been sacrificing all these freedoms. I've been self-abusing, putting myself as the martyr. Why would I do that to myself? There's freedoms that she's exercising that we're kind of jealous deep down that we've not been exercising. So I'm not saying we just need to go out and start just banging all the chicks we can find because, hey, she gets to have an affair, so I do too. But what
Which a
freedom?
lot of men do that, actually, by the way. That's
They
their
do.
response. Yeah.
They do. They
Keep
think,
going.
oh, well, if she does that, then I'll do this. Then she'll get jealous. And then she'll come back. Okay, that just overly complicates the situation. So what a man can do, though, is there's many limiting factors you've been bringing into your life that are just self misery. It's the way you look at things. It's the way you spend your time. It's the way you've built your life. And you did it to yourself. She's just revealing to you right now that you're stuck with your own emotions, your own self-love, your own ability to manage your how you feel right now, because she's removed hers. And you suddenly are realizing in that moment how incredibly low you've been treating yourself. It's not how she's treating you.
Yeah. One thing I find with emotional safety, and it took me forever to learn this, is that it goes back to the woman sitting on the deck. When or Alison Armstrong talks about the Meadow reports. When a woman is constantly sharing with you how she feels, this is how I feel, this is my right now, this is my present, this is my present, this is my present. That if her Meadow report or her deck report makes me go to an emotional place, I'm not emotionally safe, because I don't actually own my emotions. My emotions are directly caused by responding, or rather reacting to, whatever she's sharing about herself. Well, I found in my own marriage, Garrett, that if I would constantly ask my wife, and for me it came up as, what's wrong, what's wrong, what's wrong, right? that eventually she would get sick of me battering her to tell me what her emotions were. She would tell me, then I would just go dark, right? Like I would have an emotional response to that. And I would maybe sulk or get angry or irritated or defensive. That was a lack of emotional safety thing, because I was teaching her, if you tell me your emotional truth, I can't handle it, right? Because I'm not emotionally safe. And if I'm not emotionally safe, then for the woman in my life, then she doesn't actually have emotional safety to experience them authentically. Because for her to experience her emotions authentically, including their expression, she can't, because I am triggered. I'm a man that does not know how to sit there and experience his own thinking and self-regulate and self-control. So this is an area that got me into worlds of trouble the first 2 decades of my marriage, and gets considerably harder in an affair, because if a woman is trying to process the emotions, which many won't, right? Because they've already concluded he's not an emotionally safe man, so there's no way I'm telling him my why, right? But if the rare woman who will, if a man can't actually hear that without going into himself, and this is the issue, is he's going into himself. There's no building from there, because he'll never be the backstop that a woman needs all the time, but especially if you're going to try to work through the very difficult circumstances of an affair.
Let's break that down just a little bit more,
Yeah,
because this
please
is
do.
this is
Please
one
do.
guys trip up on a lot. They think,
Mhm.
oh, but I've never hit her. I've
Yeah,
never raised my voice around her. I've done all the, like, I am a very emotionally safe person. It's because for the feminine, there's a different experience of what emotional safety is. And you've just kind of alluded to it. So I'm just going to expand on it a little bit
yeah,
more.
yeah.
Within every man, there is a relationship happening between his conscious mind and his body. Okay. His body says, I'm hungry. His brain goes, okay, let's get you some food. His body says, I'm sleepy. His brain says, okay, let's get you some rest. His body says, I'm horny. His brain says, okay, where can my sexual energy be perpetrated forward to create something, right? So when there's a disconnection between the mind and the body, she can feel that. Because when your body's like, oh, I'm hungry. Hey, how come the wife's not bringing food? Oh, I'm horny. How come she's not giving me sex? Oh, I'm sleepy. How come she didn't make the bed? Okay, we've just broken the relationship between our brain and our body. Our body can't even trust us. How can she trust us? The
Hmm.
trust happens here first. And when we can do it with ourselves, she can experience it with us.
Yeah, and I like that in each of those examples you just referred to essentially a form of victimization, right? Where you had a need, want, or desire is how I say it in my work with men, but you didn't see yourself as responsible to meet that need, want, or desire. You saw a character outside of you, right? In this case, her, which makes her the villain. And if you're a victim, she's a villain. And a woman is not going to feel emotionally safe with a man who sees her simultaneously in his head as the villain. Even if he's not hitting her, shouting at her, he's living in a truth that I believe that women are highly emotionally intelligent enough to experience, that there's some blame going on. He's my intuition is telling me he thinks I'm the problem, right? And it's ironic, because it's in that moment we actually want something from them, and we're feeling victimized that they're not giving it to us, right? And it creates this kind of downward spiral of increasing hostility towards her, which increases her perception that she's a villain in your story, which moves her further away, which makes you more victimized, right? Yeah, it's very difficult to come out of that. Was good clarification. Thank you.
There's an element of where men tend to be wired more physical and women more emotional. So when they don't feel that they have that emotional connection with you, it's easier or more logical in the feminine brain that that emotion can happen somewhere else and not be violating something between you two. We tend to be more like, our greatest fear when an emotional affair happens is that she might end up actually having sex with them too. That's like the big, oh no, no, that would like really builds the anxiety. And for the woman, Like, I've talked to divorced women about this, and it's interesting because like, oh well, he just had sex though. He didn't actually have feelings for her. And she was able to get over the affair pretty quickly because he didn't have feelings. Where for us, we're like, what? My wife had sex with another man? That's like a massive violation. So we have a little different way of viewing emotion versus physical. And it's very important for the woman that she's able to have that emotional connection. And I did write an ebook. It's on my website. It's called The Devastated Man's Marriage First Aid Revival Pack. And in there, I describe how a man thinks, talks, and behaves to establish these levels of emotional connection and trust, because us men don't realize that when she comes in and says, why did you load the dishwasher like that? And we reply with a reason why, we just broke a chance for emotional connection because we got defensive.
Right, you went into your story instead of staying with her and hers. Yeah.
Instead of going, oh really, why do you feel like it's wrong, and then drop the mic, let her say why she thinks it's wrong. Why do you even care? I mean, empathize with whatever she says. It's the fact that you even felt like you needed to tell your reason why that you broke the chance to have an intimate conversation about her feelings of why she feels like you loaded the dishwasher wrong.
Yeah, that's that empathy, compassion, and understanding again.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, great. So I'll make sure I include a link in the description to that, to where somebody can get that ebook. So the next thing, Garrett, that I found, that the number 8 characteristic was that each men tend to gain clarity about 5 things. And this is also, and I think the order I see them. And that is who they are, what they want, where they're going, what they're creating, and who can join them. And I think you almost all but repeated that, even nearly verbatim so far. So yeah, what strikes you there? Is there anything else that you see that clarity is necessary for? Really anything you have there?
The clarity I would add is when you're coming up with your values, your unalterable terms that you operate from that are consistent, because you used to be attached to whatever she was doing, that determined your course of action. Now you're just coming from who you are as a man. You need to clarify, is this something that makes me feel more energy or less energy when I live from this place? So you needed to start developing a lot of curiosity as you move through your day. What's the smells you like? What's those colors you like? What's the experiences you like? Notice what makes you want to live and what makes you want to hide. Because if you just establish a whole rule book on how all the pain can be removed from your marriage if she would abide by these rules, that you put that on your ship, like every woman that rides in my ship, this is the rules for you. I can kick back now with a beer and enjoy this ride. Okay, you won't enjoy that ride because you didn't build from a place of things that make you happy. You have to have absolute yeses and absolute nos, always coming from that place of, this is that thing that I feel my energy go up from when I allow it into my life. So therefore it's a yes or a no. That very black and white way of living shelves off the things that we may have been allowing or inviting along the way previously that were actually dragging us down, making us not want to get out of bed in the morning, making us not enjoy our job. We did it to ourselves.
Yeah, it's that whole knowing, or that whole emphasis on not what you're moving away from, but what you're moving toward, right? It just reminded me when you were saying that, my oldest daughter, I have 6 children, and my oldest daughter is a huge Formula One fan. And so she turned 16 over the summer, and she's just kind of hell bent on, we've got to go karting because that's how Formula One drivers get started. So we went to this go karting establishment in the Poconos, and it just cracked me up. There was signs, like you couldn't go 4 feet without seeing a sign telling you something that they didn't want you to do, right? I have never seen more signs in any location that defended a position, right? So for example, I went to the bathroom and there's a sign, no kidding, professionally produced sign explaining the color of the water in the toilet bowl. And that it was, no, it's not because we don't clean the toilets, it's because the Pocono water. And, just, you walk outside, if you complain too much, we're going to ask you to leave. And it was just like, it struck me as a perfect picture of how a lot of men go about trying to build a life. It's like, here are all the signposts of me telling you what I find unacceptable, right? But zero explaining, here's what's going to happen at this park that's going to be delightful, right? There wasn't a sign there that talked about how fun go-karting would be, right? Or any of the attributes of the track, the cars, you know. And it was just like way lopsided with, this is what we don't want in our establishment, right? But nothing that told you or led the way in any capacity of, well, what do you want here? What does happen here, right? And yeah, I find a lot of men live this way, especially when they get into the next topic we're going to talk about, boundaries. Is they can't articulate and define the life that they want to live, only what they don't want. And this kind of goes back to even your circling around in the canoe in the lake, you know, swatting her every time she paddles wrong, but not ever explaining, this is where I want to go. This is how we get there. This is how I'm going to, you know, take 2 paddle strokes, and I want you to take 2, and do it on this side, and I'll do it on that one. And instead, just, it's all critique, all defense. So yeah, let's talk about that 9th one. It's and again, these are in an order for a reason. After a man's kind of gotten clear about these things, then I do find that all the men that have kind of made their way through this in a meaningful way are all men that establish and maintain clear boundaries for self. Now, I always tack on for self when we talk about boundaries, precisely because most topics or conversations where people are talking about boundaries aren't boundaries at all. They're rules, like you talked about. So yeah, talk to us a little bit about your experience with finding your boundaries for yourself, and whatever else comes to mind along that line.
It's so easy just to grab what culture or society says is the norm for things and be like, well, this is just how it is. But let me remind you, we're all born naked on a big hunk of dirt, and there is no rule until somebody says it. And why does he saying something mean more than something you say? It's just not, it's not true. Because each man's like, well, she's been, you know, doing this and this, and that's infidelity. Okay, define infidelity for you. There's polyamorous people out there. There's monogamous people out there. There's every range you can imagine. For one man, he might be like, you can never text another man. That would be a violation of my boundary. Okay, so that's why we have to bring it back to, again, like you said, boundaries for self. What am I not going to control people with? What am I going to allow myself to continue to engage with, energy to, and invite along with me? What's that line look like? Okay, if it's not honored, there needs to be a consequence. It doesn't mean you like beat them over the head, but there's a removal of something that you're no longer going to give in that direction. They're no longer invited in this part. And the consequence needs to escalate if the boundary is violated over and over. So like just a real practical example, maybe you framed it with your partner. You said, if you would like to regain trust with me and earn it back, I would need you to no longer call that man that you had the affair with. Delete him off your phone. But if you don't come up with the consequence and then it happens, it wasn't anything anybody lived by. But if you were like, and just so you know, I am not a man who continues to share a bedroom with a woman who calls another man who she's been having an affair with. If you do, that's the couch. And if you do again, there's the motel. And if you do again, that's how we start the divorce process, is on that computer right there. Okay. So now that you've established framework, we have something clear to work in that you found is right for what you need.
Yeah, I go even a step further with at least myself and a lot of men, is try to format your boundaries in a way that the only character you ever talk about is I, right? You know, I'm Garrett Prettyman, and when a woman cheats on me, right? Because, and it doesn't mean that there aren't natural consequences for other people. It just means if you can't talk about your boundaries without saying you, then you really haven't had boundaries in the real sense, meaning you've created rules and ultimatums, right? Whereas I like to say that for me, a boundary is a lot like walking around my property. It's the place where I know if I take one more step in that direction alongside of you, I'm actually no longer authentically me. right?
Hmm.
I'm way outside of my integrity. So if we're in a relationship, we're walking together through life, and my wife takes a step towards another man. Now, if I walk with her and I can stay with her, then I'm actually the guilty party in my reckoning, because I'm not living in a place where I'm sitting there judging her, because the only person I have any control over is me. So if I keep walking with her, then I'm out of an integrity, right? Then now I have actually violated my boundary, which was not to walk with people who give their energy to other men. Um, right. And so the onus then is on me. Well, what do I do when I realize I'm at a boundary? I have to turn around. I have to go a different direction. Right. And so it's not that she might not decide to do something different, but instead it's like, what does that require of me? It requires that I turn around and I do XYZ action, right? A boundary without actions is not a boundary. It's just wishful thinking, and actually not trustable or reliable to a woman if you won't live by your own boundaries, right? Um, and then if I turn around and go the other way, then she has to decide, well, I don't want to be here by myself. Or maybe she says, I'm fine. That's not really my concern anymore. It's really up to her. It's a matter of staying within my own kingdom of self, right? And making sure nobody else has any sway over that, right?
It's important too to recognize that she will test the boundary, possibly even violate the boundary, simply to know if it's a real one. It's
Yep.
like,
Yeah.
it's like a dog that comes up and puts its snout on your leg when you're sitting on the couch, and then it's a paw, then it's two paws, then it's half a dog. I've seen dogs on the couch. Like, how did this even happen? It was
That's
looking
right.
for the boundary. It didn't know where it was, and it kept pushing and pushing. So rather than getting pissed, upset with her when she violates your boundary, like, being like, what the hell, man? I laid out this rule and you've just blatantly broke it. Don't you respect me? Like, that's not the right approach. You can actually smile and go, she's a woman. She wants to know, where is the boundary? Where is the bank? And now you
I'm,
have the opportunity to build trust, because you're going to bring around that bank that you've told would be there. And she's going to find out that it is there.
that all made me think of goats, since we both have experience in our past and present with, I do anyway, with having goats, that goats always test fences. You like, they say, how do you know a fence will hold a goat if it'll hold water, right? Because goats are always looking for that vulnerability. And yeah, that's interesting. That brought to mind also another really important thing I find with boundaries. I don't think I said in that article, which is not only should ideally they just refer to I, but if you feel like you have to talk about them, you're probably in danger. I find a lot of men really want to try to have a lot of conversations about boundaries, because they're hoping, they don't know this, that they're doing this, but they're hoping that if the more I talk about them, the less likely I'll have to act upon them. And that never works. I see a lot of men get routinely frustrated because they're like, I declared my boundary, right? But rarely were they actually declaring a boundary, a true boundary. But if it was, they were declaring something they weren't really prepared to do. And I think that's really important, what you raised, that those will be tested. And that's not an evil thing or a bad thing that women are doing. I heard somebody, I don't know who it was, referred to it as, it's like a smoke alarm. You test the batteries in your smoke alarm because you need to know that it's reliable. And so if you're going to say, I'm a man of boundaries, and the woman in your life comes to test them and you falter, you're actually proving to her you're not very trustable, you're not very reliable. And so where else are you doing that, right? Where else are you telling the world or someone something that you're not actually willing to do, right? And this is the invitation to men, is to become clear about what you value, your boundaries, but act upon them. So I would encourage any man, try not to talk about your boundaries, right? Which goes against a lot of psychologists' advice, but a lot of psychologists give bad advice. So yeah, anyway. All right, so let's talk about the last one, number 10, and then I'll give you some space to talk about anything else you want to add. And that is, in these group of men, that each man has reached a readiness and a willingness to end the relationship, even if he desired, and most often he does, to restore or repair the relationship. Talk to us a little bit about that.
There's just some basic human behaviors that come into your favor, like the law of attraction. When you start creating what you want and going there, and she's welcome to join or not join. It's that thing of, if you're so close to something, you can't want it because you already have it. But when you start to back away from it, now there's some space. It creates a vacuum. Some men want to like pour out onto the woman, like all the why you shouldn't have done this and how horrible it was that you did that, and just like really, ream the woman out for the affair and everything that she's done to you. But she has internal pressure abilities. That's external pressure, right? That's trying to make her be something. She has internal pressures that will build all on her own. If you just back off and get in the canoe and start paddling it where you want to go, and later on you might turn around and she might still be in the canoe or she might not. It doesn't matter. You haven't really been checking because you know where you're going now with your life. And she's going to be, I've thought of so many scenarios over the years that I know have happened to my wife and have created internal pressure. Like she'll be off at the cinema with friends watching some movie, and then some character in the story is going to have an affair. How do you think that's going to feel for her when she sees that and is reminded over and over that, oh yeah, I did that once? That's internal pressure. She has a conscience. You don't need to activate it from the outside. Just let it go, let it run its course, let her emotions run their course, let her own internal pressures build, and let her manage and navigate that. That's her job to manage her happiness. Your happiness is your job to manage.
Yeah, but right, and this is the most common one I hear with guys, although they don't usually know how to say it. But if I say it, they get it. Yeah, but I'm afraid if I stop focusing on that and I turn around, that she's just gonna leave. She's just gonna, if I take my eyes off of it and I tell her I'm okay with it ending, that she'll understand that as I don't want her, or I don't care about her, and she'll just go away. I'm afraid it'll all be over at that point, right? What would you say to the man who's got that yeah, but?
Oh, I'll even add another yeah, but that I hear all the
Okay.
time. Well, for years, I've been so distant and working so many hours and hardly been around for her. Our relationship is so vague already, and we're so emotionally disconnected. I feel like we need to actually start working closeness now. We've been too distant for too long. Okay, well, I can tell a story about one man I worked with.
Let's do it, man.
He had been sleeping by himself in the master bedroom for about 9 months, and she'd been sleeping down the hall, and they hadn't had sex in like that long. And when he finally got to the point where he was like, you know what, I don't care. I'll divorce. Let's get a divorce. I don't even care anymore about trying to save the marriage. I know where I'm going. I know what I'm worth. I know how I'm going to get there. And I'm no longer like dictating my choices based on trying to save a marriage. Suddenly he was faced with the problem of she moved back in the bedroom, and then she wanted sex 4 times a week, which was more sex than he actually wants. So this is when you take two magnets and you oppose them, you can feel that polarity, but you can't see it. There's just some laws of nature. You have to relax and trust the process. We call that spiritual confidence. We know that when you jump off a roof, you're going to fall because we got gravity. Nobody wakes up at night in a dead panic that, oh my God, gravity's going to stop. I'm going to float up in the sky and burn in the sun. No, we have spiritual confidence that gravity's gravity, ain't going nowhere. There's some natural rhythms like this. You just need to trust and let your monkey brain go that's telling you that it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I like to point to people. I can't find it very easily, but there's this YouTube video of somebody who's cutting down a tree, and the guy is holding on to a guideline tied to the tree, right? And the tree just whips off, and the guy must fly like 30 some feet or whatever when the tree gives way. But holding on to your marriage with that death grip of this must work. It sounds like a good idea, but actually more often than not only does it kill the attraction, but it results in injury to the man, right? And unnecessarily so. All right, so before we wrap up, what else would if you wrote this article, if I was going to write a version 2, what other elements have you seen in the men who have navigated this space of emotional or physical affairs in a way that you would say is success? Now, we realize success can mean a lot of things, but men who would self-report, you know what, I liked how how I did that. I liked the results I got. What are some other characteristics you've noticed in those men that could be added to an article like this?
So first off, the men that I personally know who have also been faced with an affair and came out the other side happy, some of them still married, some of them not. Most of us did reattract our wife in some form. My wife still wanted to be here for Christmas and come by with the dog and go camping and all kinds of things. But many of us got to a point where we realized that the ship we're on and where we're going cannot accommodate her anymore because she doesn't match those values that we finally got solid on. Who would have thought? I would have gladly, and I am not joking, I would have taken a saw and cut off my arm to save my marriage. I was that desperate. I had the deep root of a religious upbringing where divorce is a huge no-no. It's not an option. Your brain can't even go there. It's not allowed. But what I realized is that actually it can happen whether you believe it's a thing or not. There is nothing you can do to stop it. So when you find you have a value that's faulty, when something like that happens, you're like, okay, so you need to rewrite your narrative about some of your values. That's why we keep going back to that clarity. And it's a process that needs to be followed in an order with another man who's already done it and can keep you on track. No man's gone out solo and then he may over the course of a decade finally got to this point, but when a man comes by your side who has experience with it and has been around it and knows how to get you through the maze, you'll get through it much quicker. Because many guys will go straight to the marriage saving part of what we said today, and they'll completely skip the first few things we said, like stop checking your phone, stop trying to control her, stop defending your ideas and positions and values, and grieve. Okay, take a moment or take a week, take a summer and like grieve the loss of the woman you thought you married. She doesn't exist. You got to grieve all 5 stages. There's a lot of stages. It might take you a year. Okay, you need to work in this one stage at a time. The inviting of her back into you as a new marriage with you as a new man, where she has to meet you for the first time, is a process. It doesn't happen in a week or a month. You can't just jump to the end process. I tell guys, it's like when you go in the gym. I wish I could just have you grab the biggest, heaviest weight. It'd be great, but you can't. You got to start at the little one. It's just how it is.
Well, and also the journey, you know, that in that metaphor too, I think it's easy to miss that when you do pick up that weight, the heaviest weight in the gym, the real joy of picking that weight up is all of the weights you had to pick up and the pain you had to endure to get there, right? If we could just walk into a gym and lift up the heaviest thing, we would be men of exceptional physical strength, but very little mental and emotional and spiritual strength, because we wouldn't have actually known what the character qualities that must be born in us to become the man that can endure that kind of weight, right? Yeah, I used to approach, I don't know if you and I've ever talked about this, but I have kind of a 4-stage approach called bust, trust, lust, and thrust, you know, and the bust stage is all about, you know, breaking up all this stuff in us that makes us untrustable, right? And it's really, if you don't take the time of doing that, and a lot of that is mourning, and a lot of that is also kind of getting over or putting to death, if you need to, the idea you had about who your spouse was supposed to be. I have an article on my website that says why you need to bury your wife in the backyard, right? And I mean this kind of pseudo spouse.
Yep.
But yeah, you have to do all that before you're going to build trust, and then the trust stage itself is time consuming. And you know, and if you do all that well, you might. I mean, the chances are pretty high that you'll reattract the woman in your life. You may not want her to be reattracted by that, but she probably will be. And then, of course, you can move on to thrust if that's the thing for you. So, Garrett, where else can men listening to this video find information, or what can you offer those men, you know, that you could talk about here briefly in the video? I'll put links in the description when we publish this video. But tell us a little bit about how and what you do, and where men can find more about Gary Prettyman, your story, and your services.
So under my name, garrettprettyman.com, I do have a website you can visit that has an easy form you can fill out to reach out to me if you want to have a free talk. And there's 2 modalities I'm going with men right now. The one is for the man who this just happened. He's blindsided. he's desperate and he just wants to get his confidence back. He wants to get his clarity. He wants to be able to get in that canoe and get it going in the right direction so that he can invite her. And we're going to cover foundational things right out of the gate to calm the fear of divorce and the anxiety and the like the terrifying emotions, like get those calm so you can be a relaxed man who's operating from his choices, not his emotions. And then the second way I work with men is some men have already done this work and they are at that place, but they want that deeper dive into they've now that they've had a taste of some development as a man, they want to really uncover the emotional world and the deeper layers of intimacy and emotional connection. So I do shadow work with men too. Those are two ways that I work with guys, and both of those are one-on-one, where it's just you and me, and we set aside time each week to question what you're doing and get solid on why you're doing it and if it really aligns with who you are, and then always bring in a new insight to challenge it, to make sure that you're not operating just unconsciously in something. Like I was operating unconsciously for years thinking divorce isn't an option. When you have a limiting factor like that, it dictates a lot of the things you're doing in life subconsciously. You don't even know it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a way that men can quickly get back on their feet and get clear in their mind about how they're going to create what they want.
All right. Well, I hope any men watching this who feels particularly drawn to you and your story and your perspective will feel free to reach out to you. Of course, I help men similarly, and as brothers, we don't feel like competitors, but just different men doing the same thing and the same journey together. There's no shortage of men out there, as that are running into this who need help. I have my own unique ways of helping them. I mentioned the bust, trust, lust, and thrust. I have group and one-on-one mentoring journeys I take through men through in that process. I'll put actually a link below to just what I call my journey map. It kind of explains where men can get started. But I generally like to just have a phone call with men first, and I know you do the same. And so I'll have a link on my description below to talk about how to set up that free call, 60 minutes or so, just to get to know a guy, figure out what's going on, and give him, really, my goal in that call is just to give him encouragement. And so, hey, listen, I thank you for being here today and for your perspective on this. I'll look forward to doing some more videos with you in the future. And thanks again for being present.
All right, thanks, Saven. But I want to add one thing quickly. Anybody listening to this, I've known Saven for a number of years now, and I can guarantee you that he has an extremely sharp intellectual ability to bring in clarity where you may be completely confused or have a lot of fog in your life. He can lay it all out so you can see how the gears work. And for a lot of men, when you pop the hood and you see the engine and you understand how everything works under there, it's not as intimidating. And Saven is the man you want to go to if you want to understand how does all this connect and what's really happening here.
Oh, thanks for that. That's really kind of you to say. I used to have a carburetor on my desk because I didn't say the gears, but my mom used to always give me hell when I was a kid because I'd always try to explain to her how carburetors work, and she was not at all interested. But I do hold this idea that for some of us, I'm one of these, I think you and I are like this way, that if you know how something works, you feel empowered to take it apart, figure out how to put it back together again, and clean it, right? That's what I love about carbs, because at least it used to be this way. You could take a carburetor apart, you could rebuild it, and it would work, right? And a lot of times relationships are the same way. When we understand how to take them apart, how to adjust the floats and degum the things, they work. So that's a great metaphor. All right, Garrett, thanks for being with us today. I'll talk to you soon, brother.
Take care now.